Hi. I'm gonna try and go with something. In spite, I'm not in my best state ever. I just wanna talk to myself to regulate, but I have been having something I've been wanting to put on video. So I guess I'm gonna try it now, see what goes. And I just want to relate to what I'm wearing. I know I'm in a onesie again. I live in Israel and it's really hot. And today it's actually 42 Celsius right now outside. And I'm obviously with an air conditioner, but I'm putting it on low cooling. And I just don't feel like hiding myself just for someone to feel comfortable with what I'm wearing. So that's that. So what I want to try and talk about something, but first I want to say I never get anything from nowhere. Everything I say or talk about is a kind of it's kind of a synthesis of things that I take in the form of written or video or all kinds of work of other inspirational people, or two that I practice. So actually, I came to understand after many, many years that I have a kind of the way my friend teacher Doug Scott talks about it, kind of a vocation or a function, service to society, that I'm here to, like, it's the way that I operate. I take in a lot of stuff. I'm very curious about the world of self-development and spirituality. So I tend to taking a lot of influences, and then I also tend to practice quite a lot of tools, and it's just the way I am. And what comes out of it is a kind of integration that is ongoing. And because when you take in stuff and you practice this stuff, already you've got a transformative process. And then when you take in different stuff and practice it, so it's the same person assimilating different influences. So you have a kind of transformation and integration of the different influences again into one experience of one person. So I never, like, everything I say and do is about things that I've taken in and practice. I never get anything of nowhere, and I always have a source to what I'm talking about. So today's integration or synthesis is about something I noticed about two influences that I've been taking in for a while, one more long-term than the other, but both are impacting me substantially these days in the way of practice and also contemplation about them, which one is the law of one, and primarily the practice that is talked about and recommended by the being that are channeled in the law of one material, doing diction with my face, which is the balancing exercise. So if you don't know what the balancing exercise, I'll just say that the balancing exercise for me is a great practice. I'm really glad they point this practice out in the materials. I'll briefly share what it is in a moment. The other thing that I'm really influenced these days by is the practice called centering prayer, which comes out of kind of a reformative lineage of Christian teachers that wanted to renew the mystical, practical aspects of engaging with Christianity, thinking that, and rightly so, that Christianity lost its with along the years and generations, it lost its practical implication, and thus it lost its, well, validity as a mystical way, and was left with only deadened belief systems and rules and ways of ways of siloing societies. So centering prayer brought about from people like Thomas Merton, and then after him Thomas Keating, which is a monk, was a great teacher of the mystical Christian way, and then also Richard Rohr after him, leading to the person I know personally myself, happy to know today, which is Doug Scott, which introduced me to this lineage. So what I'm going to say basically here is that I found a kind of fault in the two practices, and it's my tendency to find the weak link in things I practice in systems and teachings. This is the reason why I haven't endeared myself so much to teachers I've met personally along the way, because I have this tendency to find where the weakness is. Actually, sometimes I feel like I come across someone or something or a teaching just to, not always, but frequently, it seems like I come across something like that just to point out the weak link. It's kind of annoying, but I've come to accept my role in this way. And now I think I'm in a stage that I'm really deeply accepting it and even celebrating it, recognizing that it's a kind of a gift to bring to people and point out, gently and kindly point out the weak places, corners that one may meet engaging with those practices or systems. So yeah, let me pause for a minute. So I promised to talk about what is the balancing exercises taken from the Law of One material, and to really, in rough lines, it's an exercise that is about integrating the feeling aspect of the human being and bringing feelings into balance. The way it's done generally is, well, during the day, we all have what they call in the Law of One biases. Biases is things that we, preferences, things that we like and dislike. And those things trigger us emotionally. They bring us what is felt as stronger feeling states. So if I go along the day and feel something strong, I probably have a bias there. I prefer things to be this way or that way. If it's a negative feeling, it would be bias against the situation. And if it's positive, it means something that I have a positive bias about just happened. And then we're flooded with these feelings. And what the law, the raw contact in the Law of One suggests is that at the end of the day, we sit down, we scan through the day that we had, and we identify one of those strong feelings that we had. I usually find it easier to find, to start or to go to negative feelings because I kind of have them a lot. Okay. So let's say I chose a negative feeling which stems from a negative bias. And then we sit with it. And the way the balancing exercise goes is that, the way I understand it, is that we think about the situation, feeling to that feeling, trying to engender it anew in us, to feel it again by thinking about what happened and what the situation was. And we use an attitude of deep acceptance, radical acceptance for the feeling to be here right now with us while meditating or sitting. And we use that attitude for a few minutes, feeling into that feeling, allowing it to grow and grow in us. And when it grows to a bigger extent, so it kind of floods us, this feeling grows more and more. And it reaches a kind of pinnacle when we feel like, okay, this is a lot. While trying to allow this feeling, we call upon the opposite feeling. So if in the moment I call upon this bias and this feeling, and it's negative, and I feel like resistance, or maybe anger, or maybe sadness. So I felt into it, and it grew and grew in me. And then when it reaches a kind of peak, I ask myself, okay, what am I feeling right now? And what would be the opposite of that? And then usually, in a magical way, I get the answer, okay, you're a negative emotional feeling, or a negative opposite, sorry. Bias would be this, sorry. And then the invitation is, okay, invite this into your feelings, your space right now, the opposite. And then I feel into that, I think about Like, okay, if I felt into anger, I would ask myself, okay, what would be the opposite? And then it comes to me, serenity or peace towards someone. So I said to myself, why, in which occasion do I feel peace? And it comes to me immediately, usually. And I feel into that and I imagine it a bit and I open up to that and allow myself fully to allow, this is a key point, allow the opposite feeling of the previous one. And then the third stage is to like invite them both to reside in your space in the current moment, in the present moment, holding them in presence together, allowing them to coexist. And then usually what I do, if I manage to do that, if I manage to get there, then usually what I do is I stay there for a while and then I pick a glance at what is watching both. So I kind of prompt myself, like inquire very briefly and very tenderly, what is it that is holding, who is it, or what is it that is holding both in this moment? Can see who watches those two emotional frequencies or biases or whatever you would call them. So that's, and once I do that, I kind of get a glimpse of a kind of very deep, I don't want to even name it. So I get a glimpse of that. And then probably a few seconds after, I'll feel like it's completed. The process is completed. And I find my way back to some kind of a grounding in the body, which is what I'm going to comment about next, not next, but further along this video. And I ground and I finish the exercise the way that I would finish good meditation. Okay, so that's the balancing exercise, the way I understand it. And centering prayer is it's actually meditation. I think they called it prayer because Christianity is obsessed with the word prayer, and this is the way they could just introduce this kind of practice to Christians. But it's meditation, and I'm not going to talk about it at all, but I'm going to comment on it. Maybe briefly in one sentence, what I can say about it is that the way Thomas Keating talks about it is that you sit and you just allow yourself to open up 360 degrees to God. This is centering prayer. And the way Thomas Keating talks about it, and this is the issue that I'm going to relate to, is that when you do that over time, over months or years, you would go through kind of a purification, psychological purge. Because opening up to God or presence brings about the material from your subconscious. It brings about all your one moment, all your repressed material, emotionally repressed material, and there's no going around that. So he just points that out and lays it out very beautifully. And I have immense appreciation for the way he lays it out, but I do have some comments about that. So that's centering prayer. So currently I practice both. It's part of my sadhana, it's part of my practice, and another thing that is part of my life is being trauma informed. I'm trained at great modality, which is called the IFS, Internal Family System. And I've been informing myself about trauma for the last at least something like 7 years. And this is exactly the point that I intend to make here, which is that both of these practices and directions of self-explorations, the my beef, so-called beef with them, is that they are not so, maybe Thomas Keating and centering prayer much more so, but still not enough. They don't teach you about trauma, and they don't teach you about what can happen being flooded with subconscious, unconscious materials, what can happen and how overwhelming it can be. And both exercises or practices make it so that you might believe, well, Thomas Keating talks a lot about needing spiritual guidance from someone with experience, but still he talks about so much, but I guess he didn't come from a time that being trauma informed was so much bon ton. It wasn't so much talked about in his lifetime. He came from just the previous century, and I think he died just recently, maybe 10 years ago, or maybe less. And now trauma is all the rage, and I think it's a very meaningful and pivotal part when you come to talk about spiritual practices, and these spiritual practices, especially, maybe not especially, but for me, it can pose as a very, very useful information when dealing with those kinds of practices. And I'm going to say why. I think what both practices don't take into consideration or talk about so much is that let's take, for example, the balancing exercise. When you summon a feeling that you had during the day, and you invite it to grow in you, you're kind of doing an opening up practice, and you're kind of encouraging your emotional material to be felt. And then what can happen, quite simply, is that you'll be flooded. And if, like many of us, you are holding in your system some repressed trauma, or even not so severe trauma, but systematic trauma that was layered over the years. So you might be just when you open up to feel your feelings very intensely, and this is what the exercise invites you to do, you might get flooded by a very strong feeling with very deep content there. And the moment that you get flooded, all kinds of hormones, you might not even be able to hold the presence and self-holding sufficiently enough for the exercise to be sufficient, to be quite simply good for you. And you might get what you don't want to get, which is more overwhelm, less organization, less peacefulness, and it might work for the worst rather than for the better. It quite simply might backfire, right? So this is something that people should know when they go into this kind of exercise, and the Ra contact or whatever beings they are there, I didn't find the mention of that. So I guess you have the Ra contact and the friends. They are not considered human. And I guess maybe you have to be human to be trauma informed and consider these kinds of things. I don't think it's subtleties. I think it's a very obvious point to take care of not getting overwhelmed with emotions, with subconscious materials coming up, with traumatized parts, just coming to unload when you invite them to, I'm here, I'm open, let's feel things intensely. There are traumatized parts in you that you're trying to repress, not consciously, but the systems is trying to hold down for many of us. And these parts, when you invite them, there might happen unloading of those parts, and they might take over, and you might find yourself flooded, and then you'll have to regulate yourself in other ways. Not all regulating ways advisable, like overeating or substance abuse or whatever. So there's I feel it's advisable to know about this, and also one has to know about the right way to do the balancing exercise without that happening. So being minded of that, what I just talked about, is half the work. Just being minded and noticing if this exercise floods you too much, just don't do it. Because if you have repercussions after doing this exercise because you invited your repressed materials to come up and it flooded you, and then you have to self-regulate in another way, maybe this and some ways are not so good for you to self-regulate. So maybe it's not the right exercise for you right now. And I have to say, for me, sorry, it took a long, long while, at least 2 or 3 years, knowing about this exercise, that I tried here and there to do it, and I felt no. And I even didn't know why. I didn't know why it's not for me, but I felt like, no, 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 it's not for me. I can't do it. It's something is too much. I don't know. And I left it. And then I came across it again in some place in the materials and tried it again. And again, I got no, no, no. And just lately, I came into, after much, I guess, inner preparation, you might say, and working on myself with things that are good for me, I came, I guess, to the place that I can utilize this kind of exercise without getting too agitated with my feelings, that I can hold. And a lot of the preparation, I have to say, was doing mindfulness meditation, guided mindfulness meditation with an app. This is a lot of what I feel prepared me for this kind of work. But now, the sun is really, wait a minute, under control. And so, yeah, I got up and my mind gone blank. So today, what I was going to say is today I'm kind of grateful for this exercise, and I find exploring it benefits me a lot, and I'm enjoying it, and I can see its merit. But I couldn't say that beforehand when I tried it. So this is about the balancing exercise of law 1, and the same thing I want to say. A similar thing I want to say about centering prayer. Because when you talk about Thomas Keating, talks about, and I love this kind of exploration. He talks about the divine therapist. The divine therapist. It's a great idea. The idea is that when you sit in the centering prayer and you give yourself and open yourself to divinity, this process that he talks about of purification and even purging, it is done as the divine or God or source or whatever as a therapist. And you give yourself to this holding, but it's not a holding of a therapist or of a responsible other, as you might call a therapist, but it is done in front and in communion with the divine. And that's all well and good. And it's a wonderful idea, and I'm sure I'm gonna have my own process with that, and I'm gonna learn a lot about it going further with this practice. But I wish people, with everything that Thomas Keating shares, I find myself wishing people were more informed about trauma and also about parts work and how to work with their parts and their emotion. I wish there were more not only informed but also adept with integration of emotions and all kinds of content coming up. The way that I'm fortunate to be informed and practiced in, because I was lucky to practice modalities like internal family system and focusing of Eugene Gendling and somatic experiencing and Sedona method before I met Thomas Keating and centering prayer, which, as he says, and I agree, is a really high level practice. But I'm kind of concerned that people meet it early on. I don't see a lot of young people practicing it in the practice group that I visit for centering prayer. Most of them are quite mature people in the 60s and above. But I'm still finding myself concerned about people might come to it at an early age or without even a mature age, but without proper preparation. There's a lot of P's, proper, and R's. Proper preparation. And without proper preparation and then getting flooded with content in a not unnecessary way. When if you just are adapting in meeting your parts and knowing what to do when such content floods you from within, and how to manage that and how to hold that, then I feel the ride might be much safer and much easier. I'm not saying it would be easy, because anyway, it is challenging. The whole centering prayer route, but it can be safer if people just know that to take a step back sometimes when they're sitting there opening up to everything and to divinity and to the presence of God, and then starting to feel strong emotions coming up. I wish they knew that they can do a lot more than just write it out and suffer it. Because when content really comes up, and it will come up, because when you open, again, what this practice shares in common with the balancing exercise I just mentioned from Law of One, one of the things it shares is the fact that we are inviting ourselves to open up very radically. One talks about opening up to our emotion, and the other talks about a wider opening, which is to divinity itself, but it includes everything, every aspects of our being, physical, emotional, and mental. So it's even it can be said to be an even more radical invitation to openness and to transformation and change and integration. And what I feel is missing from Keating's, and I'm very cautious at stating that because I'm aware of the immensity of this teacher and what he brought about, which is already very rich and very responsible. And I have a lot of appreciation for what he brought with him and left after him. But I still would prefer if people could be more trauma informed and know that it's okay to take a step back sometimes, and maybe sometimes when you sit on the cushion, do more emotional holding than just pushing yourself to open. And it's okay when you get regulated again and relaxed and the emotional stuff subsides a bit, you can again concentrate on opening. This is one pointer I want to make about it. Be comfortable with going back and forth and not pushing into openness. This is one point. And the other point is that the beautiful point that IFS, internal family system, makes about the repressed parts in us that are held within us in a kind of a cell or a silo. And when you approach those places, those vulnerable places, those slightly or severely traumatized places, when you approach them and when they kind of break free because there's all this openness in the system, they can flood you. And the point that IFS makes, which is a beautiful, very useful point and practical, I can attest, is that when strong content comes up, you can talk to it and ask it to flood you less, to be less intense. This has another word, another name for it, which is used a lot in psychology circles, and it's called titration. Titrate. This is a secret. If you learn how to titrate, or in other words, ask the inner content, the strong feelings that's coming up, ask it, okay, talk to it, and ask it, do you mind coming up, but not too strongly as to overwhelm me? Can you please? You already have established an incredible contact with that part. You're not missing anything. By the opposite, you are establishing a kind of healing relationship with that content or part or whatever you would like to call it. But people should not be so much blinded by the term of another term, I'll say, yeah, concept. People should, I won't use the word should, but I wish people would be not so blinded by the concept of unity that they are afraid of playing as different parts in themselves, which is a very practical tool sometimes. What I feel is that you go into those, sometimes people go, and this is a kind of a trap that I feel I'm pointing out, and it's subtle trap, but I feel people are missing on a lot of health, of psychological well-being, when they come into all kinds of unitary circles. Okay, so there's this dichotomy, right, that it's hard to not be trapped in, because the moment you talk about unity, the moment it gets polarized from another thing, like you're talking about a positive thing that is unity, okay, and then it gets immediately polarized as if there is a negative thing called division. That's why I find that talking about unity is sometimes deluding for some people and creates some problems, because unity is actually not opposed to anything. Okay, it is not opposing separation or division, because unity includes everything and excludes nothing. And actually, I find that the correct word, or the most healthy word and less dangerous word would be integration, not unity. So what I'm saying is, people go into those unitary fields or circles, and they can get practices that are about unity, and then they get kind of afraid to step back from the intensity of the practice offered, because oh no, if I don't go that way, as if there is a direction to unity. And I feel that happens a lot because of the male influence as opposed to masculine influence on spirituality. And this has been diminished to a great extent, but it's still going on, and it's still pretty prevalent in this field, that there is a great masculine influence on spiritual circles and practices and thinking, especially thinking, that people go into a circle or a sphere of influence that is talking about unity, and then they get about it as if it has a direction. But in a way, there is a direction towards unity, but it's more roundabout direction than you would think, and it's not like one track minded, like people sometimes think, that if a teacher is talking about a practice, now I have to go at it with ambition and rigidity of direction. Integration, which is a more, for me, a more closer word to the real quality of unity is not a straight linear path. It can't be, because you're integrating everything, okay? And when you're integrating, it's a more messy and more roundabout path. So all this rampage I went into about this, I started from what happened to people when they sit in to practice the very simplest instruction of centering prayer, which is open to God, open to the, okay, it's simple, and in this way, it's very helpful that it's simple, because simple practices are helpful, because you know what to do, and you don't get lost in very complicated instructions, and it's helpful in that way. But if you get too rigid about it, and you don't allow yourself, if you don't know what can happen with overwhelmed and overwhelming parts in you, when you open, it's like a Pandora's box, in a way. You can come across all kinds of very intense feelings that were like caught up in all kinds of cells inside you, not seeing the day of light, as it were. And now when you're opening up and introducing a lot of basically presence into your system, so there's a kind of dynamic that just happens that a lot of very serious spiritual circles know about. And also today, those modalities like IFS and Somatic Experiencing, they know about it as well. That when you introduce stronger quality of presence into your system, be it by the intention of feeling your feelings strongly, more stronger, or be it because you're doing centering prayer or something else, the repressed material tends to come up, and it might surprise you by its strength. Those are really strong emotions curled up inside you, like it's like a zip file. It's like you double click on that zip file inside you, and it just, wow, so much. And to sum up, I feel like it's advisable if people would know to allow themselves to step back, maybe when, and this is something I admit, also Thomas Keating mentions, that there are stages in practicing centering prayer that you might feel, wow, this is a lot, this might be too much is coming up, I'm going to therapy. He does mention it. And I feel this is something that has to be stressed deeply, that maybe if you come across those periods in your practice, whatever spiritual practice you're doing, that a lot is coming up and it feels like it's taking over a bit and it's flooding you, and maybe it's hard to regulate yourself, to feel calm, to feel at ease in your day-to-day, don't be startled. Just get some support, some professional supports, because today there are wonderful modalities that are around and that can really support can really support this process. And I named a few. It's IFS, Internal Family System, it's Somatic Experiencing, and it's focusing, to name a few, and there's more, many more. Those are three wonderful ones, because I feel that what it does when you go into therapy, even if you get 5 or 10 sessions, well, maybe 10 would be a good starting place. And even if you not continue, the good thing about those kinds of sessions, of these kinds of systems, is that it doesn't only support you in assimilating and integrating your emotional stuff. At the same time, it also teaches you and trains you to do the same for yourself, because the way that they are set up, those systems, the modality is, and the tools used are pretty simple, and going through this process with another human being trains you as well to do that, the same for yourself. I'm not saying that you would be able immediately to do that with every kind of content that will come up. Not necessarily. You might have really intense trauma inside you, which demands the support of a professional human being. But for most people, for most spiritual seekers, the actual process of going through that process with a therapist or a practitioner or professional practitioner will, to an extent, train you in that modality. And then you have another tool which you can use in your meditation or in your self-exploration or your balancing exercise, because you will learn to titrate emotion. You will probably learn to self-hold your more vulnerable, volatile parts when they come up. So I guess this is a really deep recommendation that I have to mind those topics, and first and foremost, allow yourself to go back and forth with these practices. Don't make yourself sit with a certain practice if you feel it's bringing about overwhelm and disturbing your well-being. And if you do come to this point with a practice, maybe consider to get some support, some professional support, either from a meditation teacher that is experienced and well-versed in this modality that you're practicing, or with a therapist that can guide you along integrating your emotional stuff. And I think I came to, I feel satisfied about expressing myself in this subject. Don't hesitate if you have questions. Don't hesitate to reach out in the comments below. And I think that is it for today. So be well. Bye bye.